Welcome. I am Krista McAllister and joined today with AI expert David Espandola. Really expert strategist, advisor, technology entrepreneur, and two-time author. David, let me know if I get these wrong. The Exponential Era and Soulful You in the Future of Artificial Intelligence.
That's right. Thank you, Kristen, for having me once
Fantastic.
again. It's a great pleasure being here with you.
And you said once again, because we first recorded on this topic almost 2 years ago. And I
Right.
remember as we were just really, AI was becoming mainstream. It's been around for decades. But
Hmm.
what stood out to me was this concept of a prompt engineer. And now I feel like we are all becoming prompt engineers. It reminds me of the early days when I went to an all day class just to learn how to do a search in Alta Vista.
Yeah. Yeah.
That really dates me.
This idea of the prompt engineer, it's really, I think, a good illustration of how fast the technology changes. Because when these models started to become available to the public, we all started playing with it, right? And then we realized that in order to make these models work well, we needed to have some expertise in how to prompt the models. And there were several techniques that were developed, and it became a science in of itself. But then over time, the models became better and better, right? So now you don't need to really have that much expertise in prompting. Just a regular human conversation can get a long ways in getting the model to respond the way you want. So everything changes very, very fast in this world of AI.
And with that speed, I think that some of the challenges that small to mid-sized business owners are having is the speed. It feels like the speed of business is getting faster, the pace is getting faster, and we feel as if we don't have AI being used in our operations and our customer service somewhere in our company, that we're behind the times. And I believe you just wrapped up a project with the Small Business Administration trying to help small business figure out what are some of those challenges and maybe what's a good lens for them to be using when considering implementing AI.
Yeah, so I worked on this project with the SBA, and what they're trying to do is they were really trying to get an understanding of what's happening in the small business ecosystem as it relates to AI. And they were trying to figure out how can they best help small business owners to adopt AI and to use AI effectively. So we put together a number of activities to gather data and understand what's happening in that ecosystem. So we did surveys, we did research, we did several interviews, workshops, and what we learned is that a lot of business owners are concerned about the impact that AI may have in their businesses. But the challenge is they don't know where to start. So this is a common thread that we heard throughout. I don't know where to start. And so, we put together a number of recommendations to help the SBA put together programs that will help small businesses learn how to get started. And so there is a lot of possibilities in terms of how you go about getting started, and we can get into that in more detail if you like.
Before we do that, what were some of your biggest ahas or takeaways from the SBA where you may went in with one hypothesis and as you gathered information, you talked to business owners, you had to sit back and go, oh, I did not see that one coming.
Yeah, so there were some things that we learned that were not necessarily surprising. So things like skill gaps, right? People don't have the technical expertise that they think they need in order to be effective with AI. There were some concerns about funding because some of the AI activities may require additional investments, and several small businesses are not ready to make those investments. There were general concerns about cybersecurity, so that risk aversion aspect of implementing something that's unknown. So all of these things are common themes that we hear from small businesses, but it's not much different from what I've experienced over my career working with Fortune 500 companies, some of the same kinds of concerns. But the one thing that I thought was interesting is that we've been talking about AI for a couple of years now since ChatGPT came out in November of 2022, right? So it's been 3 years, and a lot of educational programs have been put out. There's a lot of resources out there for people to learn more about AI. And it was surprising to me that a lot of people are still way behind in understanding the possibilities, understanding the technology, understanding what it means for their businesses. So I think we need to continue working on education. I think education is really essential here in helping small businesses get more familiar with what the possibilities are from an AI standpoint and also understand the risks. Because one thing that I like to talk about when I'm talking to clients is there's the benefit side of the equation, but there's also the risk side of the equation, and you need to consider both.
Absolutely. And I think going back to some of those findings and recommendations from the project you did and speaking with, meeting with, and surveying small to mid sized business owners, what were some of those takeaways that you got from that and maybe some perspective on how SMBs can approach AI adoption or in some cases adaptation?
Yeah, so I think it goes back to being very intentional about putting together an AI strategy. And this is something that business owners can do by themselves if they feel they are ready to do that, or they can bring in a consultant or an advisor that can help them think through a framework for putting together strategy.
What are maybe some frameworks or strategies? As business owners, we're used to strategy. How are we going to grow our business? How are we going to get our costs under control? Is there a common framework for strategy when it comes to AI in our businesses?
Yeah, so I think that's a really important topic. It's one of the things that I like to recommend to my clients is to really think through your strategy as you're thinking about adopting AI. And there are some good frameworks out there. There's one in particular that I like, and I'm going to borrow terminology that I learned from a senior partner at McKinsey that resonated with me. And what she says is there are three types of AI adoption frameworks or categories they can take: makers, shapers, and takers. So let me unpack that a little bit. What she refers to as makers are the companies that have enough funding and enough risk tolerance to be able to develop new models. So think of companies like OpenAI is probably the one extreme of that example. And then there are others, there are several companies that are working on new models. But for most people or most companies, it doesn't make sense for you to be a maker just because of the investment required, the risk involved. So if you eliminate that category, that basically leaves you with two choices. It can be a taker or a shaper. So let's talk about takers first, because that's a little bit easier to talk about. So a taker is basically a company that is leveraging AI that's built into the tools from the vendors that they are already using. So for example, if you are using Salesforce CRM, Salesforce already has several AI capabilities built into their CRM application that you can start
Mhm.
leveraging. Or if you're using Microsoft tools, there's Copilot and so on and so forth. So the advantage of being a taker is that it doesn't take a lot of work to leverage these technologies. There might be some education involved, some governance, and some AI policy that you want to develop to use it effectively. But other than that, it doesn't take a lot of investments. Now, the downside is that you're not really using AI to be a competitive advantage because all of your competitors are using or have access to the same tools. But that's, an important decision. And for a lot of small businesses in particular, that may be a perfectly fine choice to make. I'm going to be a taker, and that's all I'm going to do with AI. Now, where it gets interesting is when you decide to be a shaper, because there's really a wide spectrum of investments and risks that you can take within that category itself. So it could be something as simple as taking an existing model and then use prompt engineering plus RAG, which is retrieval augmented generation, to train that model to be more specialized in your company, in your products, in your culture, and you can leverage very simple techniques to be able to accomplish that. Now, it's possible that you want to take it to the next step. You want to invest more, you want to get more out of these systems, and you want it to be more specialized. And so you can go into a technique called fine tuning, where you're changing the
Okay.
weights of some of these models so that the model will be more specialized in the things that you want it to learn. And then you have things like small language models. If you're concerned about privacy, about your IP, leaving the company and you want to host that internally and you're not comfortable with putting your IP in a third party application, you can host your own AI. And maybe all you need is a small language model that doesn't necessarily know everything, but it's very well trained in the things that matters to you and your business.
Yeah, I love that last one. It's one that's not talked about as much, yet it can be that hidden gold mine in any company. And that's using the small language models to really almost document or to capture all of that knowledge base that is inside of a company. And whether we lose it when someone leaves or whether we're losing it in between departments, in between people, people can be in two different offices and you lose a lot of that knowledge share between them.
Right.
So you're saying being able to capture it and how we do things and then learn from that, just starting from the inside, can be hugely powerful.
Yeah. And I think, one of the things that many people don't realize is if you take a model like ChatGPT, for example, that model is huge. It has, over 1 trillion parameters. It requires a lot of compute, and it knows a lot of things widely, right? So you can ask it about philosophy, you can ask it about literature, you can ask about science, you can ask about just about anything, and it will know quite a bit about any of those subjects, but it doesn't know much about your product specifically. Now, if you're putting together a customer service chatbot as an example, that chatbot doesn't need to know anything about philosophy or literature or science or geography. All it needs to know is about your product specifically and perhaps some policies and some other things related to your company. And that's where a small language model really makes sense if you are trying to accomplish that without having to build on a very large compute infrastructure.
Of all the different applications that we have for it, one of the common challenges that I'm hearing from CEOs and businesses is this pressure from whether it be boards, the market, especially if they're looking at doing some type of M&A, to implement AI, to use AI, to be whether it's AI integrated, enabled, enamored. They just want to say powered by AI.
Yeah.
What are you seeing out there, or what advice would you give? Let me put it that way.
Mhm.
What advice would you give to any CEO or owner who's feeling that pressure from the board of the market to do something?
Yeah, so I think you're absolutely right. There's a lot of pressure out there. The boards are putting pressure on the CEOs, and the CEOs are putting pressure on the staff to do something about AI because there's this fear of missing out, right? So I think we all sense this. And I
Hmm.
think it's a good thing to be thinking about AI. I think it's a good thing to be leveraging the capabilities that you have and training your organization to think about AI first. But there's the right way to do this and there's the wrong way to do this. So let me give you an example. There's one email from a CEO that sort of went viral because he basically said to the entire company, he said, "We are an AI first company, and I want everybody using AI to do your jobs. You don't need any change management. You don't need any training. Just grab tools, go out there, start using AI today. And if you don't use AI for your job, you're fired." So, being an AI first company is a good thing. But like I said before, you need to think about the risks as well. And the right way to implement AI is for you to build a policy so that your employees know what is appropriate to do with AI, what's not appropriate. You need to provide education so people learn about the proper way of using these tools. And they need to understand that these tools are not perfect. They hallucinate sometimes. And the last thing
Hmm.
you want to do is use an AI to put together a message that you're going to send to a customer and damage that relationship with the customer because, it wasn't reviewed by a human, Maybe it shared things that it shouldn't have shared. Maybe it offended the customer because of cultural issues, language issues. So you got to be very careful with how you use it. You can't just say, just go out and do it. You have to really be intentional in getting the organization ready to use AI properly.
I just heard recently in a meeting, an HR expert was talking about one of the most requested policies right now in trainings that she's doing is around AI policies.
Hmm.
And I remember going through this same thing back when emails came along. I had to sit in a meeting
Yeah,
and sign documents to here's how you use email communications, here's how you don't.
yeah,
If you put capital letters in, that means you're yelling. Please don't do that. We've seen this story before.
yeah,
And
yeah.
I'm even in basic communications, I've noticed when I collaborate on content with someone new, I have the conversation up front. Here's how I use AI. Here's how I
Hmm.
don't. How do
Hmm.
you use it? Anything you send to me, I need it clear. Did you use AI to brainstorm? Did it write it? Has it been reviewed? Have you? It's almost, in some ways, I'm having to put some additional protocols
Yeah.
in place in order to understand the validity or the source of the information. And I can imagine a business is no different.
Right. Yeah. And I have a customer that did a fantastic job in approaching this, and I like to use that as a model because it's very effective. So they were very intentional about, first of all, assigning somebody to be the champion within the organization that was going to drive these AI initiatives. And then they put together a well thought out policy delineating what is appropriate to do with AI, what is not. They went one step further and they put together a training program, a formal training program. And what they did is if you wanted to use AI in your job, you needed to go through this training program first so that you would learn about the fundamentals, you'd learn about the tools, you'd learn about the policies, and only then they would give you access to the tools that they allowed you to use in the job. So I thought that was a really smart approach to do this. They got their employees through the training. They walked out of that training with some very important knowledge, and then they were given access to the specific tools that they approved. And it just helped the organization adopt AI much better and be much more
Mhm.
conscientious about potential risks.
One of the questions I've been wanting to ask, because it comes up recently, is businesses wanting to bring in a fractional AI officer,
Hmm.
someone from an AI expert to come in and implement or help them with the change management. We've had this conversation I just harken back to the ERP days where we'd come in and we'd implement ERP, but then we realized the data wasn't clean. It wasn't organized. We had wrong information. We just weren't ready. The information that existed wasn't ready.
Yeah.
Are there some parallels to that with AI? Is it the thing we lead with, the thing that we do after we know how we want to operate and we get everything in place and then we bring the technology in? What's your kind of ethos or philosophy on that?
Yeah, no, that's a really great question. And I think, going back to what I was just saying before, I think it's really important to appoint somebody in the organization to sort of champion this initiative, whether it's a chief AI officer or maybe it could even be a director level individual that has done well, that's interested in technology, that you think is ready to take on this challenge. I think it's important to appoint someone. And if you don't have an individual, bring in a fractional individual to do that work with you and to help your organization take the first steps. I think both you and I we're fans of the fractional model, so I think it works really well for some organizations. But to go to the crux of your question, yes, data is really important. We have this old saying in IT, garbage in, garbage out, and that remains true for AI. If your data is not clean, if you don't have your data unified, if you don't have your data categorized, if you have a lot of junk, that's what AI is going to process. And what's going to come out as an output is not going to be of the quality that you're looking for. So working on the systems, the integration, the data component is very, very important. And you can if you're behind on that, you can do some parallel work, right? So you can start working on the infrastructure, you can start working on the data processes, making sure your data is clean. And on a sandbox, you can start doing some experiments with some of these AI tools, and maybe these two parallel threads can merge at some point. But you need somebody to lead that process, to think through, to work with the executives in the organization to understand what are some of the key business pain points that AI may be a good candidate to address, and go through a
Mhm.
prioritization process, right? Understand out of the, 10 different things that are painful today, maybe you can select one or two that you can assess and see if AI is a good fit. And then maybe start a pilot with one of those pain points. And if that pilot goes well, then you take it to the next step, start putting it out to maybe a select group of customers that you're comfortable working with as an initial pilot, and then more broadly scale that particular solution. And then you can select other business processes where you want to do the same thing. But it has to be a well thought out process. You have to prioritize where you're going to start. And you also need to think about what problem am I trying to solve, right? So I think this is one of my pet peeves is AI can't be a solution looking for a problem. You got to start with the problem and then see if AI is the right solution for that problem.
But you've outlined the basic business principles of what's our AI strategy? Here's the framework. Are we the maker, shaper, or takers? We first mover, last mover, pros and cons to both. And then the how are we go what problem are we going to solve? We're not a solution looking for a problem. And then how are we prioritizing it? So again,
Yeah.
we know when we go working on 10 different initiatives, they just end up competing for time, resources. What's the first thing and low hanging fruit? And let's get the win on that. David, thank you. Given your wealth of knowledge, your experience with your recent project, and speaking and researching with hundreds of businesses, what would be that one piece of advice that you would give a CEO and or business owner as they go into the next, 12 months?
Yeah, so I think the advice I would leave with your audience and with CEOs in particular is embrace AI. I think this technology is perhaps one of the most transformative technologies that we've seen in the last several decades. I think it's going to be transformational, and you need to be on top of it. You need to embrace it. Now, having said that, the way you go about adopting AI matters. So don't be like, that one email that I mentioned where you just say, be an AI first company, go figure out how to do it. That's not the right approach. Bring in the right individual to champion it, somebody that has some expertise. If you need to bring in outside help, then do that. But put together a well thought out strategy, just like you would for any other business activity. And once you have that in place, go through the process that we just talked about. And then the next component that I think is really important that we didn't talk so much about, but I think is worth mentioning is the change management process. This is not easy. This is something that requires a lot of education, a lot of working with people. People are afraid of this technology. There's something that's a little bit different about this one. First, it's not deterministic, so the testing process is more challenging. People are not comfortable using it for many reasons. People are afraid it's going to take their job. So why would I work on a technology that's going to take my job, right? So there's a lot of human components to this equation that need to be taken into considerations. My advice would be, yes, do the technology piece, but also think about the organizational, the human component as well.
Thank you so much, David. I look forward to sitting down with you in 2 years from now and seeing what that evolution is at that point, given what it was 2 years ago. And as always, thank you so much for your insights and your guidance as we move through uncharted territory here.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm looking forward to the next few years as well. We can't really predict the future, but we can see some of the signals, and we sort of see where things are pointing towards. And I tend to be excited about these things, but we'll see. We'll see where it goes. But thank you for having me. I really appreciate our conversation.
Take care.
You too.